A torrential downpour drenched the quiet outskirts of town late one afternoon. The roads, usually peaceful, were now flooded, and the darkened skies seemed to foretell something ominous. A luxury car sped along the wet street, its windshield wipers working overtime. Behind the wheel sat Mr. Richard Carter, a successful businessman, his face etched with frustration. The fuel gauge was nearing empty, and a GPS on his sleek dashboard flickered uselessly, leaving him without direction. Richard was a man accustomed to control, but today he found himself helpless in the cold, relentless rain. Suddenly, the car jerked to a halt. The engine sputtered once and went silent. Richard exhaled heavily, drumming his fingers on the steering wheel, his annoyance growing. Rain hammered against the windows, obscuring his view. Stuck in the middle of nowhere, he muttered, his tone tinged with irritation. Who could possibly help me now? From across the drenched street, a small figure appeared, moving closer under a flimsy, worn raincoat. It was Jake, a boy of about 14, his clothes soaked through, but his eyes shining brightly, even in the pouring rain. He glanced at the stalled car, concern and curiosity flickering across his face. "Can I help you, sir?" His words broke through the storm, like a beacon of hope. Richard stared, startled by the boy's unexpected presence. At first, he doubted what someone so young could do to assist him, but there was something in Jake's voice, firm yet kind, that made him relent. The boy knelt by the car, his small frame shivering under the deluge as rainwater streamed down his determined face. What happened next would not only change Richard's predicament, but alter the course of both their lives forever. What happened after that? What did Jake do that made Richard, a man defined by wealth and success, rethink his entire perspective on life? And how did a chance meeting in the middle of a storm become the most valuable lesson of their lives? If this story has captured your curiosity, don't forget to hit the like button and share this video to spread its powerful message. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever witnessed a small act of kindness that changed someone's life? And make sure to subscribe to our channel, HeartStories, so you never miss another moving story. The rain showed no signs of letting up as Jake stood beside the luxury car, his old sneakers splashing in the growing puddles. His raincoat, patched in several places, barely kept him dry, but he didn't seem to mind. Jake was used to this kind of weather. It was part of life in his small working-class neighborhood on the outskirts of town. For a boy his age, Jake carried himself with an air of quiet maturity, shaped by years of helping his single mother make ends meet. Richard Carter, on the other hand, was a man who had long left such humble beginnings behind. At 52, he was the CEO of a successful tech company, living in a sprawling estate far removed from the struggles of ordinary life. To him, the rain was just another inconvenience, and this unexpected breakdown was a rare interruption in his otherwise meticulously planned day. Sitting in his car, watching Jake approach, he felt a mix of relief and skepticism. "Are you sure you can help, kid?" Richard asked, rolling down the window slightly to speak over the sound of the rain. His tone was polite but guarded, his eyes scanning the boy's soaked figure. "Yes, sir," Jake replied, his voice steady. "I've helped fix my mom's car plenty of times. Let me take a look." Richard hesitated, but what choice did he have? He popped the hood, stepping out reluctantly into the rain. Jake quickly set to work, his small hands steady despite the chilly downpour. Richard couldn't help but notice the boy's focus. Every movement was deliberate, every decision calculated. As Jake worked, Richard observed him closely. There was something unusual about this boy. His determination, his calm confidence, his refusal to let the storm phase him. Richard, who spent most of his life surrounded by people driven by ambition and personal gain, was struck by the boy's quiet resilience. "Where are your parents?" Richard asked, breaking the silence. "It's just me and my mom," Jake said without looking up. "She works long hours, so I try to help out when I can." The simplicity of Jake's answer caught Richard off guard. He didn't elaborate, didn't complain, just stated it as a matter of fact. Richard thought of his own childhood, far removed from the comfort and success he now enjoyed. He remembered the long days his own father worked in a factory. Somewhere along the way, he had buried those memories under years of luxury and success. Jake's voice brought him back to the present. "The alternator looks fine. I think the battery cable came loose. If you've got a wrench, I can fix it." Richard retrieved the tool set from the trunk, watching as Jake worked with surprising skill. Within minutes, the car sputtered back to life, its engine humming steadily. Jake straightened up, wiping his hands on his raincoat. "Show, sir." "There you go, sir," he said with a small smile. "Should be good to go now." Richard felt a wave of gratitude. "Thank you, Jake," he said, pulling out his wallet. "Let me give you something for your trouble." But Jake took a step back, shaking his head firmly. "No need, sir. Just glad I could help." Richard was stunned. In his world, everything had a price, and nothing came for free. But here was this boy, drenched and shivering, refusing any form of payment. "Are you sure?" he asked, still holding out the bills. "Yes, sir," Jake replied, his tone final. "Have a safe drive home." Before Richard could say anything more, Jake turned and started walking away, his small figure disappearing into the rain. For a moment, Richard stood frozen, the money still in his hand. He climbed back into his car, but as he drove off, his thoughts lingered on the boy. There was a dignity about Jake, a strength that seemed unshaken by his modest circumstances. That evening, back in his lavish home, Richard couldn't shake the memory of Jake. His mansion, with its gleaming floors and priceless artwork, suddenly felt cold and empty. He sat in his spacious living room, staring out at the rain-soaked garden beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. His thoughts drifted back to Jake's soaked raincoat, his calm demeanor, and his refusal to accept any reward. Richard thought about the people he interacted with daily, colleagues, investors, competitors. Every relationship in his world seemed transactional, defined by what one could gain from the other. But Jake had expected nothing in return. That kind of selflessness was foreign to Richard, and it unsettled him. He poured himself a glass of wine, but the usual satisfaction it brought was absent. For the first time in years, he felt a nagging sense of discontent. Jake's actions had been so simple, yet they carried a depth that Richard couldn't ignore. The next morning, the rain had stopped, but the air was still heavy with its aftermath. As Richard sat in his car, preparing for a busy day of meetings, he found himself driving in the opposite direction, back toward the road where he had broken down. He wasn't sure what he was looking for, but something inside him felt unfinished. Perhaps it was gratitude, perhaps curiosity, or maybe it was a desire to reconnect with a part of himself he had long forgotten. Richard's journey was just beginning, but one thing was certain: Jake had sparked something in him that he couldn't ignore. Richard Carter drove slowly along the winding roads where he had met Jake the day before. The rain had cleared, leaving behind puddles glinting in the sunlight. As he passed small houses and modest shops, his thoughts kept circling back to the boy's calm demeanor and selflessness. Who was Jake? What kind of life did he lead that gave him such quiet confidence? Richard stopped at a small gas station near the spot where his car had broken down. The clerk, a friendly man in his 60s, looked up from his newspaper as Richard walked in. "Morning. Can I help you with something?" "Yes. I'm looking for a boy named Jake," Richard said. "About 14. Dark hair, polite kid. He helped me out here yesterday during the rain." The clerk's face brightened. "Ah, you mean Jake. Good kid, always helping people. Lives with his mom over in the old Maple Grove neighborhood. Tough life, but that boy's got a heart of gold." Richard thanked the man and made his way to Maple Grove, a part of town he hadn't visited in decades. As he turned onto the street, he was struck by how different it was from the pristine neighborhoods he frequented. The houses were small and worn, many with peeling paint and sagging porches. Yet there was an undeniable warmth here. Children playing in the yards, neighbors chatting over fences. He found Jake's house at the end of the street. It was a small, single-story home with a patchy lawn and a rickety fence. The porch steps creaked as Richard climbed them, and he hesitated for a moment before knocking. Whoop! The door opened, revealing a woman in her early 40s. She looked tired but kind, her eyes sharp with curiosity. "Can I help you?" she asked, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "Good morning," Richard said, clearing his throat. "I'm sorry to bother you, but I believe your son Jake helped me yesterday when my car broke down. I wanted to thank him properly." The woman's face softened into a smile. "That sounds like Jake. He's out back fixing the fence. Please, come in." Richard stepped into the modest home. The furniture was old but clean, and the walls were decorated with family photos and children's drawings. Despite its humble appearance, the house felt alive, filled with a warmth that his own mansion lacked. "Would you like some coffee?" the woman asked, gesturing toward the kitchen. "No, thank you," Richard replied. "You've raised a remarkable boy, Mrs. He trailed off, realizing he didn't know her name. "Anna," she said with a smile. "Thank you. Jake's a good kid. He's always looking out for others." Anna led Richard to the backyard where Jake was hammering a loose plank into the fence. The boy looked up, surprised to see Richard. "Mr. Carter!" he exclaimed, wiping his hands on his jeans. "What are you doing here?" Richard smiled, feeling a little nervous under the boy's curious gaze. "I couldn't stop thinking about yesterday. You helped me when I really needed it, and I wanted to thank you properly." Jake shrugged, his expression easy. "It wasn't a big deal, just glad I could help." For a moment neither spoke. Richard felt a pang of guilt. Here was a boy who had so little, yet gave so freely. He glanced around the yard, taking in the broken fence, the sparse grass, and the russet swing set leaning precariously to one side. "You've got a good head on your shoulders," Richard said finally. "Your mother must be proud." Jake grinned. "She works hard. I just try to help out where I can." Richard was quiet, absorbing the boy's words. They reminded him of his own childhood, growing up in a house much like this one. His parents had worked tirelessly to make ends meet, teaching him the value of hard work and perseverance. Somewhere along the way, he had drifted away from those lessons, caught up in the pursuit of wealth and status. As the morning wore on, Richard found himself drawn into the rhythm of Jake and Anna's life. Over coffee, Anna shared bits of their story. Jake's father had passed away when he was young, leaving Anna to raise him alone. She worked multiple jobs, cleaning houses, babysitting, and doing odd errands to keep a roof over their heads. "We get by," Anna said simply, her tone devoid of self-pity. "Jake's a big help. He's always fixing things around the house or running errands for the neighbors." Richard listened, struck by their resilience. He couldn't help but notice the gaps in their lives, the things most people took for granted. The roof leaked during heavy rain. The appliances were outdated and barely functional, and the fence Jake was repairing was a temporary fix at best. "I'd like to help," Richard said, impulsively, setting his coffee cup down. "You've done so much for others, and I think it's time someone did something for you." Anna shook her head, smiling politely. That's kind of you, Mr. Carter, but we don't take handouts. We are fine." "It's not a handout," Richard insisted. "It's about doing what's right. Jake helped me without expecting anything in return, and I'd like to honor that." Jake, who had been listening quietly, looked up. "We don't need much, mister. Just knowing you're grateful is enough." But Richard couldn't let it go. The image of Jake in the rain, refusing his money, replayed in his mind. This family had given him something he hadn't felt in years, a sense of purpose, a reminder of what truly mattered. That evening, back in his mansion, Richard sat in his study, surrounded by the trappings of his success. But for the first time, they felt hollow. He thought of Jake, hammering nails into that broken fence, and Anna, working tirelessly to keep their modest home together. Picking up his phone, Richard began making calls. By the time he went to bed, he had assembled a team of contractors, suppliers, and volunteers ready to help transform Jake and Anna's home. The next morning, Richard returned to Maple Grove, this time with trucks loaded with supplies. Jake and Anna watched in astonishment as workers began unloading wood, paint, and roofing materials. "You didn't have to do this," Anna said, her voice trembling. "We've managed fine on our own." Richard met her gaze, his expression earnest. "You've done more than manage, you've thrived. But I want to give back because you've given me something I didn't know I needed." Jake stood next to his mother, his thoughtful expression mirroring hers. "Mr. Carter," he said, his tone cautious, "we don't need much. Just knowing someone cares is enough." Richard knelt slightly, meeting Jake's eyes. "You taught me that helping people isn't about money. It's about showing up. Let me show up for you." As the work began, Richard realized that this wasn't just about fixing a house. It was about building a bridge between his world and theirs, between what he had and what truly mattered. For the first time in years, he felt like he was part of something meaningful. The sound of hammers, drills, and saws filled the air as the renovation of Anna and Jake's home began in earnest. Trucks came and went, unloading materials, while a team of workers swarmed the small property. Jake stood to the side, his eyes wide with amazement as the transformation unfolded. For a boy used to patching things up with scraps and improvisation, the sight of professionals working with precision and purpose was mesmerizing. Richard, clipboard in hand, oversaw the project with an intensity he usually reserved for boardroom negotiations. He had thrown himself into the effort completely, coordinating every detail to ensure the house became not just livable, but a place the family could be proud to call home. The porch, once sagging and unsafe, was being replaced with sturdy new wood. The leaky roof was torn off and rebuilt. Inside, the kitchen was gutted to make way for modern appliances, while the old creaky floors were sanded and polished to a warm shine. Jake couldn't resist getting involved. Despite Richard's insistence that he take a break and just be a kid, the boy was too curious to stay idle. He wandered among the workers, asking questions about tools, techniques, and materials. One of the contractors, a burly man named Joe, noticed Jake's interest and took him under his wing. "Here, hold this tape measure," Joe said, showing Jake how to mark measurements on a plank of wood. "You've got a good eye, kid. Ever thought about becoming a carpenter?" Jake grinned, his face lighting up. "I've always liked fixing things, but I've never had the tools or the time to learn properly." "Well," Joe said with a wink. "Stick around and I'll teach you a few tricks." As the days passed, Jake's involvement grew. He started helping the crew measure wood, carry materials, and even hammer nails under Joe's guidance. The boy's natural talent and eagerness to learn didn't go unnoticed. One afternoon, Richard found Jake bent over a blueprint, discussing something intently with Joe. The sight made him pause. Here was a boy who had so little yet approached life with enthusiasm and curiosity. Richard felt a swell of pride, not just in the progress being made on the house, but in the transformation he saw in Jake. "Looks like you've found your calling," Richard said, walking over. Jake looked up, his face flushed with excitement. "This is amazing, Mr. Carter. I've learned so much already. Joe says I've got a knack for this stuff." Richard smiled. "He's right, and if this is something you're serious about, I'll make sure you get the opportunities you need to pursue it." One evening, as the project neared completion, a sudden thunderstorm rolled in, soaking the freshly painted walls and flooding the yard. The crew scrambled to cover the materials, but some damage was unavoidable. Jake, drenched and shivering, tried to help, but Richard pulled him aside. "Let them handle it," Richard said firmly. "This isn't your responsibility." "But it feels like it is," Jake replied, his voice earnest. "You've done so much for us. I don't want to let you down." Richard knelt to meet Jake's gaze. "You're not letting anyone down, Jake. You've already taught me more than I can ever repay. Sometimes you have to trust that others will show up for you, just like you showed up for me." The storm passed, and by morning the damage was repaired. But the moment stuck with Richard. He realized that while he had come to help Jake, the boy was teaching him lessons about resilience, gratitude, and trust that no amount of money or success could buy. After weeks of hard work, the renovation was complete. The once run-down house now stood strong and vibrant, a beacon of hope in the neighborhood. The porch, with its freshly painted railings, looked out over a yard where the grass was beginning to grow again. In the backyard, a new swing set gleamed in the sunlight, its chains sturdy and rust-free. Inside, the kitchen was a chef's dream, complete with modern appliances and ample space for family meals. The living room, once dim and cramped, was now bright and inviting, with soft furniture and freshly painted walls. Every corner of the house had been touched by care and craftsmanship. When the family saw the final result, Anna's eyes filled with tears. "This isn't just a house anymore," she said softly. "It's a home. I don't know how we can ever thank you." Richard shook his head, his voice equally soft. "You already have. You've reminded me of what truly matters: family, connection, and purpose. I'm the one who should be thanking you." The final day of the project felt like a celebration. Neighbors gathered to see the transformation, bringing small gifts, freshly baked bread, jars of homemade jam, and even a potted plant for the new porch. Children raced around the yard, their laughter echoing through the air. Jake proudly showed his friends the new swing set and the freshly painted rooms inside. Richard stood on the porch, leaning against the sturdy railing he had helped build, and watched the scene unfold. For the first time in years, he felt a profound sense of joy, simple, unfiltered joy that came from seeing others thrive. Anna walked over, a cup of iced tea in her hand. "You've done more than fix a house," she said, her voice full of gratitude. "You've given us hope. And I think you've found something for yourself, too." Richard nodded, taking a sip. "I have," he admitted. "For so long, I thought success was about what I could achieve, what I could own. But none of it ever filled me the way this has." As the sun set, painting the sky in shades of gold and orange, Jake joined Richard on the porch. His face, usually full of youthful energy, was thoughtful. "Mr. Carter," he began, his voice steady, "I've been thinking about everything you've done for us. One day, I want to do something like this. I want to help people too. Richard placed a hand on Jake's shoulder, his voice firm but kind. You already are, Jake. Your kindness set all of this in motion. Don't ever lose that. The two stood there in silence, watching as the last light of the day faded. It wasn't the end of their story. It was the beginning of something much bigger. For Jake, it was the start of a dream fueled by hope and opportunity. For Richard, it was a chance to rebuild not just a house, but his own perspective on life. And as they watched the world grow quiet, both knew they had found something priceless: the power of connection, the joy of giving, and the reminder that sometimes the greatest wealth lies not in what you have, but in what you give. The renovations were complete, the house now a shining symbol of hope on the quiet street of Maple Grove. For Jake and Anna, it felt like a dream, an overwhelming, almost surreal change from the home they had struggled to maintain for years. But for Richard, the project wasn't just the reminder of the completed renovations brought smiles and gratitude. Richard couldn't shake a lingering thought. What more could he do? He had stepped into Jake's life as a stranger and helped to rebuild their home, but he felt a growing responsibility to ensure that this act of kindness extended beyond a single moment. That evening, as Richard sat with Jake and Anna on their new porch, the conversation turned to the future. Jake's eyes sparkled as he spoke about the skills he had learned during the renovation. Joe taught me how to measure and cut wood properly, Jake said, and I figured out how to use the drill without messing up. I think I want to learn more about building things, maybe even become an engineer someday. Richard smiled, but his heart tightened. Jake had so much potential, but he lived in an environment where opportunities were scarce. Without the right support, his dreams might remain out of reach. For the first time in decades, Richard found himself questioning his priorities. His wealth, his influence, what were they worth if they couldn't make a meaningful difference? As he drove home that night, the question gnawed at him. In the world he came from, success was measured in numbers, profits, deals, assets. But here, with Jake and Anna, success felt different. It felt like giving someone a chance to thrive, a chance he had once been given himself. The decision wasn't easy, but it was clear. Richard knew he couldn't just walk away. He had to show up for Jake in a way that mattered, even if it meant stepping out of his comfort zone. The next morning, Richard returned to the house with an envelope in hand. Jake was out back as usual, working on a small project, a birdhouse made from leftover wood scraps. His focus was intense, his hands steady as he sanded the edges of the wood. "Morning, Jake," Richard said, stepping into the yard. Jake looked up, his face breaking into a smile. "Morning, Mr. Carter. Check this out. I'm building a birdhouse for Mom." Richard chuckled. "You've got a real talent for this, Jake." "Thanks," Jake said, brushing sawdust off his hands. "What brings you by?" Oh, Richard hesitated, then handed the envelope to Jake. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said yesterday, about wanting to learn more and maybe become an engineer. I want to help make that happen." Jake opened the envelope carefully. Inside was a letter confirming his enrollment in a weekend construction workshop at a nearby trade school, along with a prepaid account for any tools and materials he might need. Jake's mouth fell open. "You mean I get to go to a real workshop with real tools?" "That's right," Richard said, smiling. "It's just the beginning, Jake. If you're serious about this, I'll help you get the training and education you need to chase your dreams." For a moment, Jake was speechless. Then his face lit up with excitement. "Thank you, Mr. Carter. I promise I'll work hard. I won't let you down." Richard nodded. "I know you won't. But remember, this isn't about proving anything to me. It's about believing in yourself, and what you can accomplish. While Jake was ecstatic, Anna was more cautious. That evening, as they sat around the kitchen table, she voiced her concerns to Richard. "I appreciate everything you've done for us," she began, "but I don't want Jake to feel like he owes you anything. He's just a boy, and I don't want him to grow up thinking he has to repay every kindness he receives." Richard leaned forward, his expression earnest. "Anna, I don't expect anything in return. Helping Jake isn't about repayment. It's about giving him a chance to succeed. He has so much potential, and I don't want him to miss out on opportunities because of circumstances beyond his control." Anna sighed, her eyes softening. "I understand. I just want to make sure he stays grounded, that he knows the value of hard work." "Already does," Richard said. "That's what makes him so remarkable. And I'll be here to support him, not to take over. This is about helping him build his future, not shaping it for him." After a long pause, Anna nodded. "All right. If this is what Jake wants, I'll support him too. But I want him to stay humble, just like his father would have wanted." The following weekend, Richard drove Jake to the trade school for his first workshop. The boy was a bundle of nervous energy, clutching his notebook and a small toolkit Richard had gifted him. As they pulled up to the building, Jake's eyes widened. Rows of tools, machines, and materials filled the workshop, and students bustled about, working on projects under the guidance of skilled instructors. Jake turned to Richard. "This is amazing. I've never seen anything like it." "You belong here, Jake," Richard said. "Take it all in and learn as much as you can." Over the next few hours, Richard watched from a distance as Jake threw himself into the work. He listened intently to the instructors, asked thoughtful questions, and quickly earned their praise for his enthusiasm and natural ability. By the end of the day, Jake had built a small step stool, his first completed project in a professional setting. As they drove home, Jake clutched the step stool like a trophy. "Thank you, Mr. Carter. I learned so much today. I can't wait to go back next weekend." Richard smiled, his heart swelling with pride. "This is just the beginning, Jake. Keep working hard, and the possibilities are endless." Richard's support didn't stop at the workshop. Over the weeks that followed, he continued to mentor Jake, helping him navigate his newfound passion and encouraging him to dream big. But it wasn't just Jake who was changing. Richard himself began to see the world differently. His priorities shifted, his focus moving from profit and power to connection and purpose. One evening, as the sun set over Maple Grove, Richard sat on the porch with Anna and Jake. The air was warm, the sky painted in hues of orange and pink. Jake was sketching a blueprint for his next project, his face alight with concentration. "You've given us more than we could ever ask for," Anna said quietly, turning to Richard. "Not just the house, but hope for a better future." Richard shook his head. "Jake gave me that hope first. His kindness reminded me of what truly matters in life. Helping your family has been a privilege." As the stars began to appear, Jake looked up from his sketch. "Mr. Carter, I want to do for others what you've done for me. One day, I want to help people the way you've helped us." Richard placed a hand on Jake's shoulder, his voice steady. "You already are, Jake. Your kindness started all of this. Never forget that." The decision Richard had made to invest in Jake's future wasn't just courageous, it was transformative. It was a testament to the power of selflessness, a reminder that the greatest impact often comes from the simplest acts of kindness. Together, they had built more than a house. They had built a foundation of hope, trust, and possibility that would carry them into the future. The weeks turned into months, and Jake's world grew larger than he could have ever imagined. Each weekend, he attended the workshop at the trade school, learning more about construction, design, and engineering. His natural talent shone brightly, earning him the respect of his instructors and peers. But more than that, Jake began to realize that his dream of becoming an engineer wasn't just a distant fantasy. It was within reach. Richard Carter continued to play a pivotal role in Jake's life. Though his involvement in the house renovations had ended, his commitment to Jake and Anna's future remained steadfast. The once bussy businessman, who had rarely found time for anything outside of his career, now prioritized his visits to Maple Grove. To Richard, these visits weren't just acts of charity. They were a chance to reconnect with the simpler, more meaningful aspects of life. One crisp autumn afternoon, Jake came rushing into the house, waving a piece of paper in his hand. "Mom, Mr. Carter, guess what?" Anna and Richard looked up from their conversation on the porch. "What is it, Jake?" Anna asked, smiling at her son's excitement. Jake held up the paper triumphantly. "There's a statewide competition for young builders. They're asking us to design and build a small structure that solves a real problem. The winner gets a scholarship to a summer engineering camp." Richard's face lit up. "That's fantastic, Jake. What's the deadline?" 2 months, Jake replied, "but I'll need some materials and tools to build my design. Do you think I can do it?" Anna placed a hand on Jake's shoulder. You can do anything you set your mind to, Jake. We believe in you." Richard nodded. "And I'll make sure you have everything you need. What's your idea?" Jake hesitated for a moment, then said, "I want to build a portable shelter for homeless people. Something lightweight and easy to set up, but warm and sturdy." The room fell silent as the weight of Jake's words sank in. It wasn't just a project. It was a reflection of his heart, his desire to help others, just as he had once helped Richard. "That's an incredible idea," Richard said, his voice filled with pride. "Let's get started." Over the next 2 months, Jake threw himself into the project with a determination that inspired everyone around him. He sketched designs, tested materials, and built prototypes in the backyard. Richard helped him source supplies and offered guidance when needed, but he made sure Jake remained in control of the project. The neighborhood rallied around Jake as well. Joe, the contractor who had mentored him during the house renovations, offered his expertise. Neighbors stopped by to lend tools, share advice, and cheered Jake on. Even Anna, who had little experience with building, pitched in by helping paint and assemble parts of the prototype. Through trial and error, Jake's vision came to life, a collapsible, insulated shelter that could be carried like a backpack. It was simple, yet ingenious, a solution born from Jake's empathy and creativity. The day of the competition arrived, and Jake was nervous but excited. Richard and Anna accompanied him to the venue, a large conference hall filled with young builders and their projects. The air buzzed with energy as participants showcased their designs to the judges. When it was Jake's turn to present, he stood tall, his voice steady despite the butterflies in his stomach. He explained his inspiration for the project, how he wanted to create something that could make a real difference in people's lives. The judges listened intently, nodding in approval as Jake demonstrated the shelter's functionality. Hours later, as the winners were announced, Jake's name was called. He had won first place. The crowd erupted into applause as Jake accepted his award, a scholarship to the prestigious summer engineering camp. Tears filled Anna's eyes as she watched her son beam with pride. Richard clapped the loudest of all, his heart swelling with joy. Jake's victory didn't just change his life, it inspired the community. His story was shared in local newspapers and on social media, drawing attention to the potential of young minds when given the right opportunities. Donations poured in to support his shelter project, allowing Jake to produce more units and distribute them to those in need. For Richard, seeing Jake's success was a reminder of the importance of investing in others. He began funding programs in Maple Grove to support underprivileged youth, creating opportunities for more children to pursue their dreams. One evening, as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset, Jake turned to Richard. "Mr. Carter, do you think it's possible to help everyone who needs it?" Richard smiled thoughtfully. "Maybe not everyone, Jake, but if each of us helps someone, the world becomes a little better. And that's enough." Jake nodded, his face glowing with determination. "Then I'm going to keep trying. I want to build things that make people's lives better." "You already are," Richard replied, "and I have no doubt you'll change the world one day." As the years passed, Jake's journey continued to inspire those around him. The boy who once helped a stranded businessman on a rainy road grew into a young man who designed solutions to help countless others. And Richard, who'd once measured success in wealth and power, found a deeper fulfillment in watching Jake thrive. Together, they proved that a single act of kindness could ripple outward, touching lives and creating a legacy of hope. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and comment below. Tell us your thoughts. Have you ever seen a small act of kindness grow into something life-changing? And make sure to subscribe to our channel, HeartStories, so you never miss another story filled with hope, inspiration, and the power of human connection. Let's keep spreading positivity one story at a time.